kick it off. Welcome everybody. Just to introduce myself, I'm Richard Feyn, the Vice President of Cider Australia and founder of Sydney Cider, which we make under the stable of Sydney Brewery. So a long time in the cider industry. We won't go into that. I'd like to introduce our presenter today, Chris Kelly, who's the founder and GM of East Coast Canning and Printing. Chris and his wife Melissa Kelly set up East Coast Canning and Printing in 2016. It was the first mobile canning company in Australia and is now a fleet of 5 state-of-the-art Cody canning machines that move around the east coast of Australia. 2 years, the business expanded into direct-to-can digital printing, which is a massive breakthrough. They also have cameras to check on print quality, video seam inspection, and inline pack-tip application to simplify the packaging experience for producers. Today, Chris is going to tell us what we need to know about canning cider, from planning and prep to quality control, the ins and outs of digitally printing your labels. Chris is well and truly in the title of canning expert, with East Coast Canning and Printing machines filling over 33 million cans since 2016. We're really looking forward to hearing from you today, Chris, and have the opportunity to ask questions specifically related to cider, which we know behaves a bit differently to other beverages. So with that, over to you, Chris.
Thanks, Richard. Nice to see you again, mate.
Yes.
For a while. It's nice to be back in the Cider Australia tent somewhat as well. We had an excellent, experience supporting Cider Australia a number of years ago, and it's nice to be kind of back with the organisation somewhat. But yeah, I'm kind of excited, excited to get stuck in today and try and provide a bit of value to the members, people who have kind of, happy to spend a bit of their time listening and kind of maybe understanding a little bit more about cider canning. And like you said, Richard, it's definitely a unique beverage. We all know that. And definitely, has its kind of unique behaviours relative to beer and RTDs and non-alcs.
So I'll just jump in here. It's Jane Anderson, Executive Officer at Cider Australia. Together with East Coast, we've been looking at all the different questions that people have asked to make sure that today focuses on the things that you actually want to know. So I'll just lead in and ask Chris to explain what's required to ensure a successful canning day, logistically speaking.
Thanks, Jane. So the actual kind of packaging day itself, in a mobile canning sense, and realistically in any packaging sense, is it kind of relies on 3 different things. There's people, there's utilities, and there's kind of the raw materials, right? And what we find is that some of the best advice that we can give is that is really to focus on the things that take some time to prepare. And what I mean by that is that, it's not possible to have 300 litres of hot water ready instantaneously, for example. So preparing for cider canning and preparing for packaging days is really all about identifying the things that take a bit of time and approaching those and nailing those down first. Getting your staff organised and getting them there at the right time. Getting raw materials procured and to site on time is obviously one of the longest lead time items. And then looking at the utility side is kind of making sure that all of those utilities are ready, like water and power and compressed air and those sort of things. So the logistics and the prep, I suppose, really begins at identifying the things that take the longest amount of time to get ready. And that's always the advice we give to people, is to try and look at those things first, because everything else can kind of come along secondary to that. And as long as we've got the room to operate, we need a a 6 to 7 meter space and a couple of meters wide, and we can get our machinery into position and get going and get running. But the one thing we can't do is kind of, wave the magic wand and get lots of hot water ready, or wave the magic wand and have the right number of staff on site, for example. So those things are the keys. That's kind of the advice we like to give as much as possible ahead of a cider canning day.
Thanks, Chris. Let's get a little bit technical now. The question everyone asks is about cider shelf life in cans. So what are some of the considerations here with regard to shelf life, such as bench testing?
Yeah, so I guess this is a huge area. I think we all know this. And let's pick it apart a little bit, but let's kind of keep it in two main streams. We'll keep those streams as one in terms of kind of microbiological stability, and essentially like a re-fermentation or spoiling problem. And then we'll keep the second stream as a can compatibility stream, right? Because those two things are really quite different. One of them's all about kill steps and stabilization, and the other one's all about the aluminium packaging and the can itself, right? So if we talk to the can and the liner first, the shelf life of cider can and should be extremely good and should be on par with just about any other beverage. Beer, for example, is an extremely stable product in aluminium cans. But once again, cider should really approach the same levels. And that's where the bench test comes into place. And unfortunately, this is the extra step that cider needs to go through compared to, for example, beer. Wine and RTDs, they all need to go through the same process as well. And the bench test process, to explain, and probably a simplistic explanation, is that the beverage and the liquid, in this case cider, would be sent to a laboratory in an inert vessel, so ideally glass. So we want to see a really hygienic, well sanitized glass vessel, and we get 4 liters of that product, and that ends up in the lab. And essentially what the lab does is they bathe raw pieces of aluminium, uncoated, in the liquid. And that gets analysed. It gets analysed every 24 hours, I believe, for the first, I want to say 5 days. And after that, the frequency of analysis becomes a little bit longer. And what this does is, although we're not exposing any drink to a raw piece of aluminium, what this does is it gives us the risk profile of the drink. And so basically, if the results of the bench test show that after 5 days there is no real pitting in the aluminium, and there has been no aluminium oxide pickup into the liquid in the bath, then we tend to have a result that is kind of a thumbs up for cans and a thumbs up for even a normal, regular off-the-shelf liner. If we don't get that result on the bench test, it often means that we need to look at an upgraded liner or potentially even a reformulation, which would mean, from a cider making perspective, a reformulation might mean, I guess, really looking at the chemistry a little closer, and I'm no expert in that, and we'd need much smarter people to help me explain that side of things. But the potential to package cider into an upgraded liner is absolutely there. We've done plenty of that over the years, based on the bench test results. And all we're really doing here is we're making sure that we don't end up with a product on shelf that has what's called a pinhole leaker. And so what can happen is that when a beverage is packaged, if it's not compatible with aluminium, it will degrade the liner that's inside the can, and it will basically punch a pinhole straight through the can, and we get these really nice little fountains that start occurring inside within the can. At least terrible losses, and generally speaking, a phenomenon called secondary leakers, and we end up losing entire pallets of stock very, very fast. So the bench test, I can't stress enough how important that bench test is to get that right, to get that compatibility question answered. Beyond that, that microbiology stream and the stabilization or kill step. Again, I'm certainly no expert here, and I can only speak to the experiences that we've had over the years. And I'll say that we've had very, very little microbiological failure with cider in the last 8 years. And on that note, the number of cans we've filled in 8 years is actually a little bit more than 60 million. We've digitally printed 33 million in the last 2 years. But of those 60 million, I would say that we have a genuine situation where it's something like 3 to 4 million of those units would be cider. And of those, the biological failures have been very low. There's so many ways and steps that we can take. We've had lots of people sterile filter as a lone risk mitigator. We've had lots of people with potassium metabisulfate, for example, and we've even run lots of cider with a Valcorin doser in line with the packaging machinery. There are lots of ways to do this, but I will say that with a little bit of experience and probably talking to peers and colleagues around their experience, I will say that the safety and the efficacy of the kill steps in cider packaging in our experience has always been very good. One of the keys really is that first stream in terms of the aluminium compatibility, and the microbiological one. I don't want to I guess downplay the significance, but we've always found that as long as there is a kill step of some description that is a universally accepted one, we find very good results with cider.
Thanks, Chris. We've got 2 questions that have come in that I think it makes sense to ask now while you're talking about stability.
Sure, mate.
One is, in your experience, what parameters in the cider make the cider stable, such as particular SO2 parameters, anything else? What are you looking for?
Yeah, and I think that this is the challenge, right? Is that there is no hard and fast rule here. I know that the number 15 parts per million in terms of SO2 levels is one that is often given and used by can makers as a limit to get a decent result. That said, I know damn well that products outside of that range pass bench tests and go to market. So I think that it's a challenging question, Jane, because there's I think that really what we're talking about here is generating a beverage and a product that is at a regular level for your normal packaging, and that should be okay, but it needs to be bench tested in order to make sure that the combination or the chemical makeup overall is actually compatible with the aluminium. You know, for example, pH. pH is a really interesting one because we see some crazy low pH beverages and they are totally fine and very stable with the aluminium. But then we also find that all of a sudden there's a beverage in the kind of high 3s of pH level that fails. And it's always to do with a multifactorial kind of part of the chemical makeup of the beverage and the drink. And that's why, to be honest, you know, things like seltzers, right? And any a lot of RTDs and things like that can actually be so much more challenging than a drink like cider, because you've got the multifactorial components of flavorings from flavor houses and things like that. But I'd certainly say that, sticking to the can makers documentation, which is available on our website, and we can provide that to anyone at any time, and hovering around that 15 parts per million or less of SO2 is probably a good starting point. And then going forward and relying on the bench test from there.
Okay. Another question was about how are people managing the sterility of sweeter ciders? Do you have anything to add on that? Any particular experience? Are you scared of sweet ciders?
More scared, yeah, I guess. Silly not to be, for sure. Like, we're going to see increased risk with increased rates of back sweetening, right? But I think that ultimately we all know that those beverages don't go that well into any package, and particularly not cans. We have packaged heaps of sweet cider. The ones that have had extremely good results have been Velcorin dosed, realistically. That is one of the better ways to stabilize, but geez, it's tough. That's some significant infrastructure that's required. It's also a nasty thing to work with. It's really quite challenging. There are obviously other ways to skin that cat. We've seen some batch pasteurized product in the sweet cider space work very well recently. It's not for everyone, I guess. There's always concern about heating up the liquid and what that does to flavor profiles. But if you can come to terms with that as a kill step, batch pasteurization can work really well, and it doesn't require the resources or the batch sizes that tunnel pasteurization needs. Yeah, there is no wonderful answer to sweet ciders.
All right. Can you give us an insight into the costs now involved in canning on site and also digital printing?
Yeah, sure. So I guess firstly, I want to make the point that really, like, my business exists for everybody, really. Our business exists for really small producers to be able to get their drinks into people's hands. It's really important part of who we are and what we do is broadening experience and choice in the market for consumers and driving business success for people along the way, right? That's really, in a nutshell, what we're all about. And so we'll do some extraordinarily low volumes, 500 litres, and like, I'll sell you 389 cans, one layer of cans. We'll do some very small scale things, but it needs to be said that packaging is always a volume game. I think most of the people on the webinar today will appreciate that and understand what I mean by that. And it's always a case of more the merrier with packaging in terms of pricing. We have always looked at the 2,000 litre mark as a very commercially viable minimum. The filling of less than 2,000 litres is extremely viable and very important as a product in terms of getting to market. But once you get to 2,000 litres, we really think that works well. And I can't stress it enough, that our pricing on 2,000 litres, we don't care if you package 7 different types of cider into 7 different cans. We'd probably care if you wanted to package that into 7 different can sizes. But even if it was 2 or 3, we wouldn't be too concerned. The way we've always, broken down costs, and it's important to understand that our business really acts like 2 businesses within one, and that is that we sell raw materials to you, and that gets invoiced when it leaves our facility. And then we arrive and we package your cider with our mobile canning equipment. And when we're finished that job, we send you another invoice. And so there's kind of really two cost structures there. There's the purchase of the raw materials, and then there's the filling service on the other side. Those cans vary on, volume and can size, but that can cost anywhere from, in the range of 40 to 45 cents right up to 70 cents for 500 ml cans in really short runs. That's per unit. And looking at a filling day is a very hard thing to give a rough estimate of costs on, but I'll give a rough idea for people who have come along today. I don't want to, have people come and give their valuable time and not get down to the crux of things. But, the way I've always described it is like $2,500. I've always described it, if I'm talking really simply, it's like $2,500 plus or minus $500 gets you anywhere between 500 litres and 5,000 litres of product. It's a pretty fixed cost between $2,000 and $3,000 to get between 500 and 5,000 litres. So you can see how that volume changes with $2,000 for 500 litres versus $3,000 for 5,000. That's an extremely simplistic view of our pricing model, but that's the best explanation that I can give, I guess.
Great. Okay. Chris, I've just got a couple of questions about CO2 and CO2 loss.
Yeah.
So how is dissolved oxygen managed in the can headspace post-filling and prior to capping and seaming? And then also another question of, what dissolved CO2 loss is there?
Yeah, love this stuff, and I could go on for a long time about this, but cider's great. I'll say to start with, in that we really do get good foam. And because we get good foam on the product, our counter pressure filling lines from Cody mean that we have a nicely perched can, a can that's been filled in quite a controlled way. We have nice foam, and we end up putting a lid on top of that foam. And what that means is that we have dissolved oxygen pickup that's really quite low. That then helps the microbiological piece, and it also helps the aluminium can compatibility piece, because oxygen inside there not only spoils the taste of the beverage, whether it's cider or anything else, but it really accelerates reactions with the liner of the can. So we try and keep the DO to a minimum. Our machines are very, very capable of picking up 50 parts per billion or less. It can take a little while to get there. It takes a little bit of management. If we're packaging, only a couple of thousand cans, we may not ever get there actually, because it takes a bit of time to get there. But we can really get quite low DO results. The CO2 stuff is also really interesting, and I guess the bottom line and the large point to make is that our CO2 loss from tank to can is extremely low. And that is thanks to the counter pressure systems that we fill with. Filling with open air gravity systems, in order to get good dissolved oxygen, you need to overfill the can, you need to create a whole bunch of foam, and it tends to result in CO2 loss. We find that our losses are, and it's annoying because we use some, there's grams per litre, and there's also volumes of CO2. And I get a little bit confused between which one is 0.1 and which one is 0.2, but I believe that on average, we lose 0.05 volumes of CO2 between tank and pack, which is 0.1 grams per litre of CO2. That's more or less our accepted kind of numbers.
Okay, thanks, Chris.
Yeah.
I'm going to turn to the Q&As now that people have asked during the webinar. Give you time to answer those, and then I think that it might be necessary, if people have questions after this, to come back straight to you guys at East Coast Canning and Printing. I have one question on shelf life. What's the typical shelf life that people are looking for and you're confident people are getting, and what's the best you've seen?
Look, I think 12 months is the benchmark, right? Is what I believe. I think that at 12 months, you're going to have a degradation in the quality of your drink. And I think that becomes, you know, that ends up really a question for you as a beverage producer. You need to probably do some work and understanding what that degradation means and how bad it really is, right? And whether it's something that's concerning to you or not. But I think that 12 months really is the benchmark. I think it's the gold standard. I think anybody that puts a 9-month shelf life or best before on the bottom of their cans, I think they're actually in the really kind of, you know, in the bucket of smart cookies in a lot of ways. I think they're really splitting the difference. I think that 9 months is a really nice mark. But I also think that for the sake of making sure that you don't snook yourself in retail, I think 12 months makes a lot of sense. I had a customer once that put 3 years on the BB of a seltzer, not a seltzer, on a cider, that was not a good idea. That was really not a good idea.
All right. Now, I think last question, Chris. What locations does East Coast Canning and Printing support?
Everywhere, I guess, is the best way to describe that. We really do support cider makers and beverage producers nationwide. We sell lots of cans into the Northern Territory, Western Australia, Adelaide, and obviously all over the eastern states as our heartland. But we do have mobile filling services in Queensland, New South Wales, and Victoria. We no longer have a Tasmania service, but that's something we would love to get back into if we could muster up the volumes. We do service South Australia from time to time as well with the mobile filling product. But we do regional, we do metro. It's really a far and wide game for East Coast Canning and Printing.
Now, there are no more questions on the Q&A. We are at 12:30, which is when we said we would finish.
Cool.
So I think I will say thank you, Chris. We will share a recording of this call to everyone on the call and everyone else who registered, and probably I'll send it to all of our members. We'll also send you an East Coast Canning and Printing mastery document, which gives you lots of more detailed information and what you need to know. And if you want more information, go to the East Coast Canning and Printing website or book a time to chat with JP. And we'll also send the link out for you to do that. Chris, anything you'd like to finish up with?
No, just that JP is our wonderful head of sales and he's well worth a chat. His knowledge and expertise in bringing beverages to market is unparalleled, and he'd love to have a chat. But the other thing is I really genuinely hope that someone's got some value out of today. It's really our goal is to really kind of try and, you know, disperse all this gold and all this information that we've accumulated over, you know, better part of a decade and get it out to people. So thanks to everyone for, I guess, giving up a lunch break or giving a bit of time and listening to me ramble.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks from me as well, Inside Australia. Thanks, Jane and Romy and everybody for joining in. I think it was really informative, and obviously Q&As to come and recordings to be put forward, and hope everything grows from here. So thank you from me as well.
No worries. Thanks, Richard.
Okay. Bye
Cool. All right. Well, thanks
everyone.
Thanks a lot, Jane. Appreciate
Thanks, everyone.
it. Thanks to Cider
Bye.
Australia as well.
See you.